Cape Agriculture Minister Ivan Meyer has called on the police to intensify the search for the killers of a Stellenbosch wine farmer who was gunned down on his farm, Louisenhof. 62-year-old Stefan Smit is the second farmer to be killed within less than a month in the province.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me here again. Last week we spoke about Franziska Blochleiger, and if you haven't seen that, I will link it up here. But today we're going to talk about a farm murder that occurred in South Africa in 2019. And it may look like a normal farm murder from the outside, but this case turned out to have a surprising twist. So if you would like to hear what happened in this case and what twist I'm talking about, then let's get into it.
Intended for mature audiences only.
Stefan Smit was a wine farmer in the Stellenbosch area of the Western Cape, and he owned a wine farm named Louisenhof. Stefan owned this farm and he had it for many years, and he was very, very successful and very, very wealthy. Stefan Smit was married for many years and he had children from his first marriage. One of the daughters that I did read up about, her name is Martine. Unfortunately, things did not work out with his wife and they ended up getting divorced. And during the time that he lived with his ex-wife, he owned 2 houses in Stellenbosch, which were constantly being burgled or broken into, and things were constantly being stolen of his. And Stefan was constantly calling the police were constantly coming over, and this was in the 1980s. And they came over, but they couldn't find any evidence. There was no DNA, there was nothing left over. So the cases just went cold and were just thrown out. And eventually Stefan said, you know what, I'm tired of using the police. I'm just going to invest in my own private security, which he did. And he only uses private security from then on. So like I said, him and his ex-wife got divorced and they moved on with their lives. Then around 2005, Stefan actually got married again to a lady named Zorena. Zorena and Stefan were apparently very happy as a couple, and they lived quite happily on a Stellenbosch farm together. And even though Stefan and Zorena had different religions and they practiced different religions, they lived happily under one roof. Now let's skip forward a couple years to 2018. Stefan, like I said, was a very successful farmer in Stellenbosch. He owned an incredibly large amount of land, an incredibly large area. And during this time, squatters started to squat on the outside and the outskirts of his Louisenhof property. And obviously this was upsetting to Stefan. The squatters or the land grabbers were just kind of putting their houses onto Stefan's property. So this was obviously upsetting. And I'm sure that not only words were exchanged between the spokesperson for the squatters and Stefan, and I'm sure things got a bit violent, but we don't know, we can't prove anything. But it was a very hostile environment between the squatters and Stefan. And with a lot of back and forth between Stefan and the Stellenbosch municipality and the South African government, Stefan kept persisting that he wants these squatters removed, which is understandable. However, the government said, you know, you can't just evict so many people. Where do you want them to go? But Stefan kept fighting, and he's like, this is my property, I'm upkeeping, they're destroying my crops, they're destroying the grapes, and they're destroying his livelihood, basically. But the squatters were obviously like, well, where do you want us to go? There's nowhere for us to go. So eventually, between this back and forth, the Stellenbosch municipality eventually said, okay, enough is enough. What we're going to do is we are going to pay Stefan off for this portion of land. And Stefan got a lot of money for his portion that these squatters were taking over. Basically, some reports say it was between 40 and 45 million rand that he was given for this. And some sources say it was a lot less. But basically, it was a couple of million, maybe tens of millions of rands for this property that the government gave him. And understandably, I get from both sides, the squatters were not happy that so much money was given to Stefan for his land. Stefan was fine with the money, obviously, but the squatters were kind of saying, listen, you could have used that money maybe to build us houses or something else instead of giving the money to Stefan for the land, which I understand as well. So there was still a bit of discrepancy between the squatters and Stefan, but eventually Stefan was like, you know what, I've had enough of you guys, and he built very, very tall walls with barbed wire, electric fencing, CCTV cameras that stayed on for 24 hours a day. And these walls weren't just really tall, they were basically double walls, like Fort Knox, basically. And like I said earlier, Stefan no longer trusted the South African police, and he decided that he was going to use private security, which he did. He used private security on his farm, and these private security guys were named Bradley van Aysland, Derek Sate, which were brothers, but I think they had different fathers, that's why their surnames were different. And then there was a third guy named Stephen Damon, who was somehow related to Derek Sate. But like I said, there were three men: Bradley van Aysland, Derek Sate, and Stephen Damon. Bradley van Aysland kind of ran the security on Louisenhof farm, and he made sure that everything was happening. He had access to Stefan's house, and he was the only private security guard who had access to everywhere. Bradley also worked very closely with Stefan and the security team on the farm, and he told Stefan numerous times that there are blind spots in the fencing as well as with the CCTV cameras. So the fencing is 100% secure, but because of the blind spots of the CCTV cameras, there are ways that people can get over possibly without being detected. So now that we got an idea of Stefan's Fort Knox residence as well as his private security team, let's fast forward to 2019. So 2 weeks before the horrific incident occurred on Louisenhof farm, there was a break-in in Stefan's house, but not a traditional break-in where things are broken and glass is broken, doors are taken down. Basically, there was an unlocked door. Someone walked into this unlocked door, opened Stefan's safe, took out 200,000 Rand, closed the safe, and left. And Stefan was very confused by this because he always made sure the doors were locked. He was very, very security conscious, and he maybe thought that this was an inside job, but he had no proof. Then, on the 1st of June 2019, Stefan Smit and his friend Peter Haasbroek were sitting on the porch drinking some beer, just chilling and talking about things. And basically they were talking about if they were to emigrate, where would they go? Is there really a future for them here in South Africa as farmers? Were they feeling safe as farmers? And I think many farmers maybe do talk about it, but this is a conversation that they were having the night of the 1st of June 2019. Basically, Stefan brought this up to Peter because he said he's 62 now, Zurena is 54, and they are getting a bit older, and they feel like maybe they can't run the farm forever in Louisenhof. But basically, after Peter and Stefan enjoyed their beers, they said their goodbyes and their goodnights, and Peter left the house. Then, on the 2nd of June 2019, everything seemed normal. The farm was running as normal. Bradley, Derek, and Stephen were all busy on the farm doing their patrols. Stefan was busy working on the farm. Zurena was in the kitchen. Everything just seemed normal. And that night, Stefan and Zurena actually had a house guest coming over, and Zurena was busy preparing the food for the night. Now, the friend that was coming over, I'm not sure if he was from Sweden or somewhere exotic like that, but basically this was a friend that was from out of country, and he was coming to visit the two of them, basically. So the night rolls on, and Stefan and their Swedish friend is now sitting at the table, and Zurena gets up from the table and she starts making tea or coffee for the two men. So like I said, Stefan and the Swedish guy are at the table. Zurena is up from the table. And while Zurena has her back to whatever else is happening in the house, 4 men come charging into the kitchen. They tie the Swedish man and Zurena up. Then they turn to Stefan and they shoot him. Point blank, twice in the chest, I think, once in the shoulder maybe, but he was shot quite a couple times. So Zurena then escapes these ties that these men have tied her up with. She then runs out of the house and goes to a neighbor's house. And the Swedish man is the only actual witness of whatever's happening in the house. And he says that the men then just go around the house, they take the cell phones, which is only 2 cell phones, and Zurena's handbag, and they leave. Both the Swedish man and Zurena were never harmed. They were just tied up, and they, like I said, Zurena left, so she was not harmed at all. So police race down to Louisenhof. They try and see if there are any suspects still there. They find none, and they start doing their investigations. They head over to the neighbor's house, which was maybe 120 meters from the actual house of Stefan. So not the property, just the house. And basically the police go to the neighbor's house and they ask, did you hear anything? And the neighbors are like, yeah, we heard shouting and we heard gunshots. Then the police go back to Louisenhof and back to Stefan's house, and they have a look around now at the fencing and the property itself. They have a look at the fencing and they see that there's no cuts to the fencing. It doesn't look like anyone has jumped over the fence to get into the property. The CCTV cameras pick up no one. And also there's no damage to any of the doors in the house, none of the windows, so no one broke in. they actually looked at one of the doors in the house and it was unlocked. And remember, Stefan always locked his doors. He was very security conscious. But remember, as I mentioned earlier, Bradley did warn Stefan that there are blind spots to the CCTV camera. So when police did have a look at the CCTV and they noticed that these 4 men did not appear leaving or entering the specific property, they thought maybe it was just because of what Bradley said earlier about there being blind spots. So police were quite stumped. They had not much evidence about this case and they thought to maybe look at the squatters who were quite near to Stefan's property, and they were talking to them. They said yes, they did have tension with Stefan, but they never intended to harm him, and they actually proved that they never did harm him. So it was not the squatters. They were actually very helpful to the police. They said they didn't hear anything, they didn't see anything, but they would help if they needed to. So despite the police thinking, okay, maybe it's a general farm attack, a robbery gone wrong, just the kind of horrific violence we do have in South Africa, they thought, okay, maybe we need to look into that. But police were keeping the evidence quite close to their chest. They were not really revealing very much. But then the police were very intrigued by news articles that were going out about the feud between Zurena and Martine, which was, remember, Stefan's daughter and his ex-wife. They were basically going at it, Zurena and the ex-wife and family of Stefan. And the reason that these two families were going head to head is because months before Stefan was murdered, Zurena was taken out of Stefan's will. And in Stefan's will included, remember, that 45 or however much million rand that he was given for the land, all of his investments, which could have been up to 60 million rand, not only his farm, which was millions of rands, but also the wine that he was making, the business itself, that was Stefan's. Now, the media was still reporting on the feud between Zurena and Stefan's daughters and his ex-wife. And while the media was reporting, Zurena came up to the media and said, look, I have proof that he left it all to me. And she shows the media a will that Zurena apparently found in Stefan's Bible. And this obviously made Martine and her mom and her other siblings incredibly upset. And this was all happening while police were busy doing their investigations. And then in December of 2020, 2 men were arrested on a suspicion of murder of Stefan Smit, and that was Derek Sate and Stephen Damon. Now, during the time that Derek and Stephen were arrested, the court was actually given a court order or warrant to go and search Zurena's house. And as soon as Zurena heard about this, she turned herself in, which was about 2 days after these 2 men were arrested. Now remember, Stephen and Derek were somehow related, but Derek and Bradley were brothers, and I found it very interesting and very suspicious that Bradley was never arrested for the murder or any suspicion of murder of Stefan. And the reason why I find it suspicious is because Bradley was said to be in the room right next to the dining room where Stefan, Zurena, and a Swedish friend were having dinner. And when these shots ran out and these 4 men were running through the house, Bradley said that he heard nothing. And I don't know, I'm not a ballistics expert, I do not have a gun, but I'm sure that you would maybe hear a shotgun go off in the next room or something happen, but I don't know, we were not there. Now this trial and this whole case is still ongoing. They have not finalized anything, but basically Zurena, Derek and Stephen were arrested on suspicion of murder of Stefan, as well as robbery, and using a firearm without a license. Like I said, this trial is still ongoing and they are still innocent until proven guilty. But the South African state does believe that they have a very strong case against Zurena and the conspiracy that she may have done it. Like I said, it's all just hearsay. There is no proof yet. The state also said that there was some text or some letters given between Derek, Stephen and Zurena that each man would get 2 million rand for the murder of Stefan. But that's just hearsay. But I think due to the pandemic, everything was delayed, and that's why things are taking so long to go back to trial. But if I'm correct, I think Derek and Stephen are at Pollsmoor Prison, as well as Zurena. They do have a men's section and a women's section, so they are separated but in the same prison. And I mean, Pollsmoor Prison is quite scary, so like, if they didn't do it, I do feel really bad for them. But what do you think? Do you think they are guilty, or do you think that this was just a farm attack and a burglary gone wrong, and Stefan was the unfortunate victim of all of this? But let me know your thoughts below. I hope you were entertained by this case, and I will see you again next week. Bye.